Well, hey everybody, John Redlin here, and this is a retro review of NWA WCW Great American Bash 1989, regarded as one of the greatest WCW pay-per-views. And I'm not sure why after watching it. Now, I will say that there were some big high points in this. Now, as far as maybe the first few years of, Turner owning the company, yes, this had some pretty high marks to it. But this was also during the Jim Herd era. And fucking Christ, there was some pretty ridiculous shit here. Now, I will say that the main events and, the big matches did outweigh a lot of the bullshit. But there was some shit that I'm going to have to get into here on this. Now, I hadn't watched this pay-per-view in full for a while, but I had seen it in full, and I was like, okay, how did this age? Well, you'll find out. I also want to say I will have other retro review content as time goes on throughout, maybe a couple shows in August, September, and the like, and possibly some Halloween Havoc events in October, so please look out for those. But anyway, here we go. We're in Baltimore, Maryland, and I encourage you guys to check out, and this of course depends on if you're a fan of Jim Cornette, but check out, it's a lengthy piece, but it's his podcast he does with his co-host Great Brian Last, where they go over how bad, the Great American Bash 1989 tour drew. Like, it only really had, I think, a house in Atlanta, I think in the Omni, it drew decently, but not great. And this pay-per-view was the only one that drew great, and it was built around Ric Flair and Terry Funk having their monumental clash after Funk had attacked Flair at, after Flair's match with Steamboat at Wrestle War 89, just like about 2.5 months before. And this whole big storyline building up. So that one did really well, and the crowd was pretty hot for most of it. Now, there were some network issues. It's like, as far as the tape that they had, I think there were some issues with the pay-per-view broadcast, so there were some glitches in the opening match. But you had JR and Bob Caudle on commentary, and Gary Michael Capetta as a ring announcer for most of it. Next to Howard Finkel, actually my favorite wrestling announcer. Or, favorite wrestling ring announcer, easily. Gary Michael Capetta always made matches seem bigger whenever he did announcements. Also, Dave Penzer in there. I thought he was pretty good too. But anyway, we get a 2-ring King of the Hill Battle Royal where they've been doing this thing on various non-televised events and stuff like that, and possibly even, some televised events. I didn't really pay attention to the WCW syndicated TV at the time because I was only 8 years old. But they had a bunch of guys in here. It's 14-man, 2-ring Battle Royal. It's kind of like similar to Battle Bowl they did at Starrcade 91. Where you had to dump somebody in the ring 2, and then dump them over the top rope to the floor, and then the last person in ring 1 and ring 2 would go at it, and then that person would win. And you had Dan Spivey and Sid Vicious, the Skyscrapers, and a lot of people actually worked twice this night, which was another thing I think that dragged this pay-per-view down a little bit, since WCW had a lot of talent. But anyway, you get Dan Spivey and Sid Vicious, Bill Irwin, Bill Irwin that was in World Class for a while, Brian Pillman, Eddie Gilbert, Kevin Sullivan, Captain Mike Rotunda, Ranger Ross, who was actually a legitimate armed serviceman that became a wrestler, and it unfortunately didn't really work out. He was only in WCW a little bit, and I don't think wrestled all that much afterwards, but he got a pretty good pop at Clash of Champions in June of 89, just a month before, which I did a review of. Check out the retro review playlist I put at the end of this video, or just scroll down. But then we get Rick Steiner, Ron Simmons, Scott Hall. Scott Hall before he even became the Diamond Stud. And yes, he was that in WCW as well. And then we also had Scott Steiner in there, Steve Williams, Terry Gordy, and basically everybody but Sid Vicious gets dumped into ring 1 eventually. And then you have Williams and Dan Spivey. After Rotunda had been tossed out of the ring, Rotunda distracts Williams. Williams gets dumped out by Spivey. And because the Skyscrapers were managed by Teddy Long, he's like, wait a second, step out of the ring at the same time. We'll split the money. It was a $50,000 prize for the winner. And this is where the glitches happen, and there was stuff like, okay, whatever. So it was what it was. It wasn't great. Battle Royals, I usually love. I love Battle Royals, Royal Rumbles, tournaments, but sometimes they don't work, and this didn't necessarily work all that well. But then you had Gordon Solie doing the backstage interviews, and he interviewed Teddy Long, and of course Teddy Long mentions you people, again, because he mentioned that in the post-match promo. And Teddy Long, why did Teddy Long have no front teeth? Did he get in a fight? Was it an accident? Serious. I don't know if I've ever known that. This isn't even me knocking, I don't have any idea. Gordon Solie always lent a lot of credibility here in 1989, especially even just doing the backstage interviews. And then we get Bill Irwin versus Brian Pillman. this went on way too long. This went on way too long. Bill Irwin, by this point, was not much of anything. Yes, he would later become the hockey player, the Goon. No, that was actually Bill Irwin, because Vince found out that he had played hockey, and he was a hockey fan, and this kind of stuff, and whatever. And then Bill Irwin became the Goon, and that pretty much ended Bill Irwin's run in WWE. Yeah, Bill Irwin just was on the offense too much here. And I get it, Brian Pillman was a new guy. He had developed a bit of a winning streak. And I'm not saying that he should have just eaten through Bill Irwin here, but Bill Irwin wasn't much of anything at this point. He was really broken down, and Pillman beat him finally with a crossbody, diving off of one of the ring ropes into the other ring and pinning Irwin for the 1-2-3. Not very good, though. And then we get the dynamic dudes, which were Shane Douglas and Johnny Ace, a.k.a. John Laurinaitis, a.k.a. the piece of shit that thought that AJ Lee was unfuckable. He should be slapped in the face repeatedly for saying that. Whether you agree and think, whether you think that AJ Lee's attractive or not, it's like telling a female wrestler that it's ridiculous. But anyway, back to this whole thing. They face off against the Skyscrapers. Dan Spivey and Sid Vicious. The crowd was always chanting for Sid. Whenever Sid wasn't in the ring, they kept chanting, "We want Sid." Sid, I know, is divisive among a lot of people. There is a scissoring incident with Arn Anderson. I need to pick different wording for that, the whole thing that happened. But as far as looks, if you were to develop a wrestler that was like his height, like 6'9", 6'10", whatever he was, you would develop somebody to look like Sid Vicious because he had the perfect look to be a wrestler. It's a shame it didn't end up working out, even though he had some moments of good. It seemed like his love of softball outweighed his love of wrestling. But yeah, I'm not even the biggest fan of Shane Douglas, and he deserved better. Spivey, never really cared for Spivey. I don't hate him. I mean, he was Waylon Mercy, which was a precursor to Bray Wyatt, when Bray first appeared. And yeah, they booed whenever Spivey was in there. Eventually, you had a sloppy powerbomb on Johnny Ace from Dan Spivey in 1-2-3, and hey, at least the crowd cheered probably because the match was over. Not very good at all. We then get we had a Paulie Dangerously interview before this as a hype up the Tuxedo match that he had with Jim Cornette, and then Jim Cornette had an interview, with Gordon Solie. And the storyline here, a brief thing, is that Jim Cornette had actually torn his ACL in a getting out of the way of Terry Gordy trying to throw a table in the ring during this 10-man war, this 10-man tag war in Philadelphia, I believe is what it was. And Cornette ended up landing on the mats, and the mats kind of, went a little bit, and he tore his ACL. So he ended up having to wrap it, and he ended up having to do a whole bunch of stuff. So you could tell he was in a whole lot of pain, but they had this blow-off match. Tuxedo matches are comedy. I will give Paulie Dangerously, who's now Paul Heyman, I will give Paul and Cornette credit. They did better with this than I thought. There were some hard hits, especially some slaps for Dangerously slapping him in the face. Cornette's hitting some, pretty good work punches, and one that was a live round. And there were so many goddamn homoerotic lines in this, and so many lines where it's just good God. They were just JR and Caudle were just being vicious towards these guys. But there was this one line from Bob Caudle that always makes me laugh. It always fucking makes me laugh. It says, "All right, let's see some clothes start coming off here." Jesus. I mean, I don't care what anybody's into. I just found it so funny because he just said it so matter-of-factly. But anyway, then Cornette ends up stripping Heyman's, or Paulie Dangerously's clothes off. I mean, except for his underwear. Thank God. It was a brief ending. Yeah, I'm proud of that. This was better than I thought it would be. It was actually, sadly, probably the best match so far. Which I feel bad about saying because there was some talent in the previous matches, but just good grief. And then we get a Gary Hart interview talking about Great Muta, who he's managing, facing off against Sting for the TV title a little later. Then we get Kevin Sullivan and Mike Rotunda, sort of the Varsity Club, versus the Steiners with a Bloodhound and Missy Hyatt. And they had 2 leashes. I'm kidding. I got nothing against Missy Hyatt. I actually think she gets a bit of a bad rap, quite frankly. They had a Bloodhound there. And that Bloodhound's just going up to everybody. It's like, hi, 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 hi. So many people, pets, all the pets. It was kind of funny. But anyway, it was a Texas Tornado match. And it was about 4.5 minutes. They go outside. There's Steiner and Rotunda facing off. Sullivan and, Scott Steiner and Mike Rotunda in the ring. Rick Steiner and Kevin Sullivan are out on the floor. Kevin Sullivan can never wrestle for one goddamn bit at all. And then Scott ends up jumping onto Rick Steiner, which knocks him onto Kevin Sullivan, kind of like, when Sullivan had Rick Steiner ready for a power slam. Scott Steiner jumps off the crossbody. They both pin him 1, 2, 3. This match was unnecessary. It was 4.5 minutes. The intros were about a third of this match. It just was fucking hilarious. And in a Sting Eddie Gilbert interview, Eddie Gilbert had a red hat on, meaning he was trying to make Puerto Rico great again with his booking. And if you know anything about Eddie Gilbert, I'm not saying that, it's just kind of funny, the red hat and all the stuff. But Sting was all fired up and everything. And then we have Sting with Eddie Gilbert versus the Great Muta with Gary Hart for the TV title. Best match of the show so far, and it was only 8.5 minutes. But Sting and Great Muta had tremendous chemistry. They made the most of a short run time. Sting dives on the Muta. He's like, hey, get in the ring, get in the other ring. Okay, fine, I'll just dive into the other ring. Hot from the start, great kicks, chops, strikes. Everybody was fired up. Their match at the New Japan Super Show in, I want to say 91, WCW New Japan Super Show, was better than this. Maybe that's because the crowd was bigger, but it was still this was still a very, very, very good match. There was a missed spot to the ref, and I think it was Nick Patrick, and then Tommy Young came in. Really sad about Tommy Young, how I think in 89, later in 89, he suffered a car accident, which ended his career. And then he actually showed up at the NWA Crockett Cup just earlier this year. And he didn't referee, but he presented the title. And people cheered him, and people were praising him on Twitter. And he's just like, it's been 30 years since I refereed. Tommy Young was a goddamn good referee. But he's in there. And they do a double pin thing where Sting picks up a Muta for a back suplex. 1, 2, 3. And I think Sting gets this shoulder up. Or Sting gets this shoulder up. And then Muta gets his shoulder up there. So basically both men got their shoulders up. But one referee saw one man down. And the other referee saw another man down. So they do where the championship ends up being held up. So Muta doesn't lose. But Sting doesn't necessarily lose the title. It just gets stripped from him. Because of a weird double finish and stuff like that. Meaning basically neither man looked really weak. It was kind of a dumb finish, so the crowd was chanting bullshit. Muta and Gary Hart leave with the title. And then there was that. And Gordon Solie asked for Lex Luger to give his thoughts. Lex Luger does not have any thoughts. That's my one shot at Luger until, this match. Lex Luger versus Ricky Steamboat, U.S. title was supposed to be no DQ. Luger said, I'm not getting in the ring. We're not having a match unless you waive that no DQ stipulation. If you talked that fast, it would have been hilarious. Nope, no DQ stipulation does not stand. Steamboat said, fine, waive it, whatever, I don't care. Steamboat carried Luger here. Luger was a good performing heel. When you could get stuff out of him, he actually meant something, but sometimes he just didn't seem to care, and that was mainly because he was a body guy, not really anything good. Luger did focus on the back Steamboat. Then Luger later tries to get in a chair, and he tries running at Steamboat with the chair and ends up hitting in the corner and hitting himself in the head, the fucking doofus that he is. And then Steamboat gets upset and shoves the referee out of the way with the chair and hits Luger across the back repeatedly, and Luger lost control of his legs. Wait, that was later in life. Oh, the smallest violin for Lex Luger and his pain that he's suffering for what he did. The poor, poor man. So anyway, we get Steamboat losing by DQ. Lex keeps the title. Actually, I think this was the title reign did not end until the following Halloween Havoc. Not 89, 1990. He held it for like 15 months. 15, 16 months, something like that. It was absolutely amazing. I think it was 523 days. So it's about 15 months. So yeah, that was something. I mean, this pay-per-view, the crowd was hot. Everybody was geared up, and they did pretty damn well, but there was so much hit and miss on this show. It finished strong, but then we had the Freebirds and Wild Samoans interview, or Samoan SWAT team interview, and of course the Freebirds are lording over the Samoans. Once again, Michael Hayes keeping the minorities down below him. Yes, I'm going to take a shot at Michael Hayes. I'm still going to, and roided up Jimmy Garvin, my least favorite Jimmy Garvin. And then we get the Midnight Express kind of promo, and then the Road Warriors, and then Dr. S. Steve Williams. And that was fun. And Cornette was actually out there at ringside with his team along with Paul Ellering because it was a War Games match. It was the Road Warriors, Dr. Death, and Jim Cornette's Midnight Express. So Cornette and Ellering at ringside for that versus the Fabulous Freebirds, Michael Hayes, roided up Jimmy Garvin, and Terry Bam Bam Gordy, and the Samoan SWAT team, Samu and Fatu. And then Paulie Dangerously was there at ringside as well. This is probably one of the weakest War Games matches that I've seen. It wasn't as bad as the Tower of Doom match that they did like at Great American Bash 88, which had its moments, but because it had Kevin Sullivan in it, it wasn't all that good. Eaton and Garvin start out, and this was shortly after Garvin had gotten the shit beaten out of him by Dr. Destiny Williams, I believe in Boston, if I recall correctly. I remember hearing that something the Cornet said and other people have said, where Dr. Destiny Williams just got pissed at Garvin and just was beating the shit out of him with like a wooden chair, and Garvin's elbow got, cut up and stuff like that. No, it's a shame. Pop some more roids, Garvin, you might have felt better. Not that Garvin was the only person to do roids, but for fuck's sake, he's a bare chicken shit heel, or even a good guy. Yes, he was a good guy at some points. He was bare as that, and the poofy hair, the permed hair, than he was trying to be a fucking roid up monster. He was not a roid up monster. He was like, I don't think I'm much shorter than Jimmy Garvin. I'm certainly not an athlete, but good Lord. Anyway, Eaton and Garvin start out, and Garvin, of course, had his elbow all taped up because of that. And then because the heels, of course, always win these war games, coin flip thing. Basically, the idea, you got 5 guys out there, 5 guys on each team. 2 men start out. 5 minutes later, another member from the team depending on the coin flip step in. Usually the heels always won that. So Terry Gordy enters first. So the heels have a 2-on-1 advantage. And then Dr. S.C. Williams gets in 2 minutes later. And it's funny, Gordy and Williams were always good rivals, but they were an even better team, especially in All Japan. And also in, I believe it was Great American Bash 92 and Bash at the Beach Blast 92. But Great American Bash 92 in particular, which built around a tag team title tournament. That was a great pay-per-view. So, but I like good tag team wrestling. Some people may not. Anyway, Samu gets in. Okay, cool. All right, he does his stuff. Animal gets in. The Road Warriors have been laid out like by these guys like a few weeks prior, or like a month prior, or something like that. And then so they wanted revenge on this. And then the Midnight Express came back as babyfaces. They were going to switch heel at some point, but they still had to be babyfaces here. So Fatu gets in after Animal's in at some point. Stan Lane gets in. So he's the second last member for his team. Michael Hayes is the last member for his team. Which is good because Michael Hayes in the ring was never really a good idea because he couldn't really work. So it's 5-on-4. Then Hawk gets in there, and he just takes up both the Samoans. Big old schmoz and everything. Hawk gets a hold of Garvin, getting kind of a weird chokehold and everything, and chokes him out. And Garvin gives up. So Tommy Young gets in there. Garvin gives up. They win. And then the heels kind of jump Animal and beating him up a bit, keeping the door locked after everybody has left. And then they get run off a little bit later. So obviously this feud isn't over. And then we have a Flair Gordon Soley interview. Yeah, it wasn't a very good War Games match. But anyway, Flair Gordon Soley interview, and we get Terry Funk with Gary Hart versus Ric Flair. Well, the idea was, okay, could Ric Flair come back from this career-ending neck injury? The crowd was fucking hot for it, and it was actually a great match. It really, really was. It's physical from the beginning. The fucking chops were absolutely insane. These guys showed so much passion and, just focus on this. It was absolutely wonderful. We then get, it's a lot of times where it goes outside and it goes back in and it goes outside because they were just beating the shit out of each other. Flair targets Funk's heads, even hits a couple pile drivers. Flair, of course, at one point gets hit with Terry Funk's branding iron, so of course Flair bladed, and then bladed upon hearing any fan talk about him blading, like at Raw Reunion the previous night. But anyway, no, it just gets a cut on his forehead. But anyway, so Flair bleeds, shocking, and then we get Terry Funk busted open later. And Funk goes for a Spain toe hold. Flair versus out, tries for the figure 4, inside cradle by Funk. Nope, Flair flips that over, inside cradle, 1, 2, 3. So Flair pins him. But this feud isn't over because then we get Gary Hart running in. Well, sort of, and then Gary Hart gets laid out. Great Muta runs down, misses Flair in the face with the green mist. And then they beat him up, are going to pile drive him on a chair. Doug Dillinger, young Doug Dillinger, stops him sort of, but then he gets laid out by Muta. Sting runs down because, of course, you had the whole thing with the TV title before. Boom, 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 big old schmoz. Baby faces chase them off. And then you had a post-match interview with Flair and Sting. It will not be over. And it's actually built up over the course of the next few weeks and months because their next pay-per-view was Halloween Havoc 89, which I should be reviewing. I think I probably can review that one. That's in October, so it's not like I don't have time. But they would face off in the Thunderdome or Thunder Cage match. I think it's Thunderdome. Welcome to Thunderdome. So yeah, this This pay-per-view was decent. It's just my problem is they hold this up in such high regard as being one of the best pay-per-views of all time. There were some great moments, but there was a lot of shit and a lot of people working twice, and at some points you're like, okay, you're having everybody work twice. I mean, not necessarily all that great. That's my opinion. It was a good pay-per-view. For the most part, it was just not a great pay-per-view, in my opinion. Though that main event did end pretty damn well, and there was some good shit. More good shit than bad shit, I will say that. Despite the fact that it was a Jim Herd era show. But anyway, that's all I have to say. So, if there are any other, retro reviews you want me to do, please let me know in the comments. As far as ECW content, I will do what I can. Also, quick update. I don't know when I'm going to bring back hashtag Ask for Honesty due to how busy I'm going to be. I will be bringing it back at some point. But I did so many episodes, I'm kind of putting that on the back burner. So anyway, if you guys are still watching by this point, that's the deal. But I'm John Ritlin, and I will see you soon.